How's it going, everybody? This is Dailies to Downloads. My name is Chad. With me is Erik. He's auditioning for Winter's Bone sequel or possibly another story in the universe of Deliverance, right?
Exactly. You could choose Missouri, or you could choose where's Deliverance take place? I
I
don't even know.
some place, at least in the movie, pretty awful.
That's true. Wrong Turn. Wrong Turn. Remember those movies?
Yeah. Well,
Like
Erik has no hat this week, so this show is already off the rails. We don't know
sold it.
where it's going to go.
Got a lot to say. Mask off, hat off.
Well, this week, we are going to be continuing our discussion about different types of documentaries. And on this episode, we are going to be discussing mockumentaries. So let's start with some definitions. Mockumentary is also known as a docu-comedy. It's a type of movie or television show depicting fictional events, but presented as a documentary. The term mockumentary started in the 1960s, but wasn't really popularized until the 80s when This Is Spinal Tap, which was directed by Rob Reiner, he used it in interviews to describe the film. So that's when it really kind of got into the lexicon. Productions like this are often used to analyze or comment on current events and issues by using a fictional setting or to parody the documentary form itself. Mockumentaries are known as being more comedic, whereas the second term we're going to talk about is not. So, Erik, what do you think? Do you like mockumentaries?
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, I think that This Is Spinal Tap, Christopher Guest, uh, style of mockumentaries is what's probably most associated with the term because I think those Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show,
Right.
um, A Mighty Wind for Your Consideration, things like that. Like they all kind of were probably the most successful and popular of that genre. Um, However, I do think there's actually been probably more, as we'll talk about, more interesting examples of a mockumentary that doesn't. I think that people assume that mockumentaries does mean comedic and does need to be comedy, and I think that is something due to the Christopher Guest mode of a lot of talking heads and a documentary crew is following this quirky small town as they put on a
Right.
stage production or whatever. But I do think if we do incorporate the what you would say found footage or what have you, if we include that in the mockumentary spectrum, then there are more experimental, more risks being taken within that subgenre. Yeah.
Well, you see, you said that you think a lot of people associate mockumentaries with being comedic. And I tell you, well, we'll get to the second definition here first, and I'll tell you why I just kind of assumed mockumentary meant any fake documentary. But the second term we're going to talk about is a pseudo-documentary, also known as a faux-documentary. It's a film or video production that takes the form of a documentary film but does not portray real events. It is scripted and fictional elements are used to tell the story. And in a pseudo-documentary, unlike a mockumentary, it's not always intended to be satirical or humorous. They use documentary camera techniques, but with actors and fabricated sets, and might use digital effects to alter the film scene or even create a whole new scene. Reality television has often been described as a form of a pseudo-documentary. And one of the more well-known figures in cinema with regard to pseudo-documentaries is Orson Welles, who has kind of become synonymous with that term in some ways. His War of the Worlds radio broadcast was described as one of the first pseudo-documentaries, or rather his first pseudo-documentary. He also used pseudo-documentary elements in Citizen Kane in terms of the newsreel approach, and as well as Mr. Akaden with the prologue. You also have Mad Max 2 opening with kind of a pseudo-documentary approach with regard to what the world is like then in the post-apocalyptic sense. And you have Oliver Stone's JFK, which was criticized for how it incorporated pseudo-documentary elements by mixing fact and fiction to convey the belief that JFK was assassinated. So I'll say this. To me, these terms are the same.
Yeah.
And I don't understand. This is the weird thing about documentaries as we've gone to discuss them. like there's so much crossover with these terms, and there's so many different terms to describe different things that are essentially the same thing, and like these kind of little pockets of documentaries that real some people might not remember even what they are,
Hmm.
and there's even more small ones that we'll get to in a future episode. But in terms of a pseudo documentary and a mockumentary, they really struck me as the same. Now, there's a third term. We'll get to that at the end, with regard to a whole different type of fake documentary. But
Yeah.
these two always struck me as being kind of the same. But you said you kind of associate you did associate mockumentary with being more comedic.
Yeah, and initially I think that was my introduction to it was the Christopher Guest model, and then I guess thinking further back, like what I saw when I was probably like 11 or 12 was CB4, Chris Rock, the fake rap group, which is a mockumentary, but that term wasn't really popular then in the early 90s. But I do think, yeah, mockumentaries really calls to the fact that it is, as we break down the word, like mocking documentaries, mocking the documentary format. So typically that was like, sit down, talking head interviews, and then cuts to a regular scene, blah blah blah, and then more narration, more talking head interviews. So usually it's to draw attention to the fact that it is a documentary, that it is criticizing the form, or at least using the form itself to like make brings out comedy, I guess, by being what you know about the form as an audience member. So I mean, there have been, but if we do incorporate things like the found footage kind of like Blair Witch and all those kind of things, like I I don't know if those are not criticizing the documentary form. Those are using the tropes of documentary, a lot of the specific characteristics and forms of nonfiction filmmaking to give the impression that it is real, which is to me less a critical dialogue with the documentary form than it is just to give off the impression that what you're watching is actually reality. And
Right.
even if it's something like Cloverfield or Diary of the Dead or any of these things that obviously are not, but are still using that kind of handheld, first person, the character who's filming it, who's in the movie uh, mode.
I feel like, yeah. I mean, in regard to found footage, I mean, I feel like certain uh, you know examples of that subgenre made you maybe at first, depending on the campaign of the marketing campaign they used, made you think, oh man, what is this, but
Mhm.
after a while it got to the point where it was like, okay, it's just a found footage film. You barely even register it as a mockumentary or a faux documentary of any sort. But I've never really liked mockumentaries or faux documentaries. It was never my favorite genre. We'll at the end we'll give some of the films that we like, but overall, I always looked at these types of movies as being somewhat dumb. And if they didn't take themselves seriously, they had a better chance of succeeding to me. But
Mhm.
if it
Mhm.
was a fake documentary. See, I even have trouble saying fake documentary as opposed to mockumentary. Like I really do just kind of always viewed it as like a blanket term. If it was one that took itself too seriously, it just immediately struck me as ridiculous. I'll cite one that I reviewed for 411, Death of a President. We talked about that a little bit off camera,
Mhm.
and it was just so stupid. I recognized some of the actors. It was this lengthy chore of a you know effort to get through. It was made during a time when a lot of people were outspoken in their opinions of George W. Bush, and so that film was used to show what it would be like if he had been assassinated. And to me, it was just stupid. And even I was looking over my notes. Um, the movie Zelig with
Yeah,
that
that's
Woody
what I
Allen
was
made.
thinking. Yeah.
Now it was really cool how he incorporated the technology, which we would later go on to see in movies like Forrest Gump. Uh, it was cool idea, but after 10, 20 minutes of watching that, to me, it just lost its luster. I was not really a fan of that one, but I don't know. I just, this style of documentary has always been really strange to me unless it becomes comedic. And, you said Christopher Guest, he's, to me, the champion of this.
Yeah, and then I guess also there were some examples of um, Taika Waititi of like What We Do in the Shadows, and a couple of those where again it's the exact same kind of style. It's just like a different, more. What We Do in the Shadows is the vampire one, but it's done in the exact same. Like characters are addressing the camera, they're breaking the fourth wall, they're talking directly to us. They're doing, you never lose the impression that there is a crew of filmmakers who are following these characters around. Um, which, yeah, it probably is a little bit better in small doses. They're also probably never longer than like 80 minutes. I think because of that, I think that there's only so far
You can
you can really,
exactly. You can only take it
yeah,
so long before you get to the point where, and this is why I don't like it. You get to a point after a while where you're like, this is ridiculous. Why am I watching this? Like,
yeah,
because you get to that point where your brain kind of checks itself. Maybe not everybody feels this way, but your brain kind of checks itself and says, this is not real. It's pretending to be real. It's ridiculous and a waste of time. By and
yeah,
large,
yeah,
but hey, there are, like you were saying, there's a ton of different examples of mockumentaries out there. There's a whole list of them. But before we get to that, we should talk about that third term we mentioned, which is Mondo films. And they are a subgenre of exploitation films and documentary films. Many Mondo films are meant to resemble a pseudo-documentary, but they instead depict sensational topics, scenes, or situations. Such, like they portray foreign cultures. They really focus on taboo subjects, such as death and sex, and they're, stage sequences that pretend to be documentaries. And the term Mondo, comes from, the Italian word for world, but it also is used as the term shockumentary, which I happen to like better. And, so I'll just tell a brief story about shockumentaries. When I was younger, I want to say 12, around that age, my stepbrother, who was older, brought home this movie from the video store. We used to go to stores to pick out our movies to watch. And it was called Faces of Death. And I had no idea what a mockumentary was, or a pseudo documentary, or a fake documentary. Had no idea. All I knew was he was telling me what was going to happen in this, and you saw people dying, getting executed, various forms of these types of things. And I thought it was real. And, boy, a mistake was made when I decided to eat pizza during watching one of those. But it was crazy to me at that age. It really sticks in your head if you don't know what you're watching.
yeah. And correct me if I'm.
Though it's like, how idiotic is this?
And did they mix? Because I never, I only learned about the Faces of Death as an adult, so I never, I didn't have the same experience of really watching it. But like, did they ever mix actual?
Yeah, they did.
They
Yeah,
did with,
they
with
mixed. They
fake
mixed.
stuff.
And some of them did mix real news
Okay.
items and fake stage one. I remember there was one funny one, and it was so many years ago. I don't remember if it was Faces of Death or one of the imitators. Like, there
Yeah.
are so many imitators to Faces of Death out there. I remember one of them, this magician had set up this elaborate trap that he had to get out of, and if he didn't get out of it, this contraption, it was like almost like a Rube Goldberg machine,
Huh?
would come down and like puncture his head. It would be like, it was like an axe to the head. And of
Yeah.
course he did not make it out. And so, like, it was just
Yeah.
ridiculous things like that. But there was also, as you said, there would be news items that were real. And then, but you also had this really creepy looking dude, introducing. the movies, which was also somewhat unsettling. But you said you have never seen any of those.
I hadn't. No, that was just something I kind of learned about as I was a little bit older.
Yeah, you got to watch one of those. See, those were the videos at the store that were marked with the nobody under 17 stickers.
Yeah, yeah, that whole genre of things that were like banned, or they used to call them too, like video nasties and all these random terms of things that were like Cannibal Holocaust too. That was also within that same, was obviously fake, but they do kill animals. They do really do kill animals in the movie. The humans that die are alive,
Right.
or not harmed. But that kind of weird mix, in that kind of, there is like a tainted, yeah, like a dangerous kind of dirty feel to it, because it's very much blurring that line, between the real and the fiction. And I feel like, yeah, that's definitely different probably than um,
I mean, you see,
mockumentary.
I like the term shockumentary. I think that works, but again, to me, all these either call them fake documentaries, faux documentaries, or call them mockumentaries. To separate them, it's like why they all it. A film is a film, regardless if it's a comedy, a drama, an action movie, or whatever. And I would
Yeah,
say the same about this. It's a fake documentary, no matter what the tone is.
yeah.
But you know, I really, in terms of Faces of Death, I think that they re-released that whole series on Blu-ray when you and I were at 411, and I really wanted to review that, but I never really got the chance.
The Blu-ray, I'm sure it was really, the video transfer was really fixed up for the Blu-ray.
They probably didn't spend too much time on that one at the start.
Yeah, HD, everything. Yeah.
They're like, yeah, just put a Blu-ray package on this and call it a day. Nobody watches those is going to pay attention. Is this 1080p? Where you
Yeah,
really
yeah. I'm like, wouldn't it, if it looks if it's cleaned up, wouldn't that actually detract from the effect that they're going for? Like,
right? Yeah,
wouldn't that
yeah.
drop them? Yeah.
Well, so and we were talking about all the different types of mockumentaries out there. Eric, do you have any favorites?
Well, if we're gonna, let's just say, if we are including all of
Yeah,
those
let's just include all three.
forms, yeah. I do enjoy, I'm Still Here, which was the Joaquin Phoenix one,
Oh yeah,
which was, again, you can throw as many new terms as you want: performance art, or living the character on David Letterman, and blah blah blah. But essentially, it is a it's giving the impression of a documentary, but obviously it is staged. But like we talked about last week with Borat and stuff, like, not everybody's in on that joke.
right.
Uh,
The joke is
so
on the audience.
exactly. So they are real situations, but it's obviously, um, heightened, elevated to get the comedic effect. Then there are like some horror ones that I did like. Operation Avalanche, which was one about landing on the moon, and actually like what they actually found on the moon, like using like real, I don't know, situations, or VHS. Remember when that whole franchise, those like horror anthology movies that were like, as most of these in the horror genre were that the people who shot them died, and somebody found the footage, blah blah blah,
Right.
yeah, and then released it in 3,000 theaters somehow.
Hmm.
That was usually kind of the
Takes
gimmick of
a
that.
lot of people, Eric. Come on.
It was always a little strange. Like, I will say, those who are not like some of the older generations, who may not be as in tune with these different forms, would be a little confused if they assumed that what they were watching was, real. Then there was the pop star, never stopping. I think.
I like that one.
Yeah, yeah, and that one,
It took me a while to watch it. Like
yeah,
I had a digital copy of it for a long time, and it took me a while to watch it. But once I did, I thought it was pretty well done.
yeah. I mean, it's not, yeah, it's not breaking any new ground, but it knows what it is, and it kind of does that pretty well.
Right.
I also I guess this would, I don't know if this totally counts, but like when we think of something like Bernie, the Richard Linklater movie, which was based on a real guy, and they do have the actors also doing like they talk to the camera, they break the fourth wall. But obviously, it's Shirley MacLaine, it's Jack Black, it's
Right.
Matthew McConaughey. Like obviously, it's not the actual real situation. Um, but if we were to extend the net, cast the net out to those as well, I think those are also pretty interesting. In that respect, I think it adds some kind of gravitas that they may be going for. Like I recently rewatched Frost Nixon,
Right.
which is based on true events, but is obviously actors that are recreated. But they still have many scenes where those actors playing those characters are speaking to the camera as if they're being interviewed. You
Right.
know, and then you have to like kind of then you feel really weird when you know that like okay, this whole thing is fake. They're acting like they're being interviewed as a documentary. We know that's not true, but they are playing real people. But should I just watch a documentary instead, or should I? And then like
Right.
then you're a bunch of uh, steps away from reality at that point. But yeah, CB4 was another one. That was probably the first one I remember having
I remember
watched.
that cover. I've never seen it though.
Yeah, it's funny. Like before I even knew that term or or what have you. Those are the main ones that I really took to. There have been a lot of, especially in the horror genre, there have been some really really bad ones. There was a good 4 or 5 year stretch I feel like where we had so many found footage things, and they none of them took any risks. They all just kind of tried to rip off the success of Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity, things like that.
The genre wore itself out, in my opinion, very quickly. There are a couple that are good, but and I would,
Yeah.
I there are some exceptions to what I'm about to say, but I would say mockumentaries, found footage films, are by and large movies that once you see them one time, they
Hmm.
really don't have much impact after that. And like I said, there are some exceptions, but I would say by and large, like the style of it kind of demands that, like, kind of calls for like the shock or the surprise factor of it a lot of times. And
Hmm.
once that wears off, I would say that about Borat as well. Once you see that once, it's like, well, should I? Why do I need to watch this again? Will it be as funny the second time?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like whenever they can try to find some new, like I will say, like I do like Cloverfield, if we include that in that category.
I like that one. I don't know if I'd call it one of my favorites, but I mean it. I mean that's found footage, but yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's a good one.
just because it does give you like the bird's eye view of from like a random pedestrian on the street. Like if you were to watch a regular film like that, it'd be Godzilla, right? So, but like the fact that we're getting it from a camcorder, you're obviously going to get it from a perspective that you wouldn't get in a normal Hollywood movie of a monster
Right.
trashing a city, right? So I feel like that was a use of the form actually enhancing a generic monster movie, you know. But that's the exception to the rule, probably.
Well, before I get to my favorites, you might ask yourself, why would anybody make a movie, or that's a fake documentary? Why would they take that approach? One director offered his thoughts, and he made the faux documentary CSA, the Confederate States of America. His name's Kevin Wilmot. And
Mm-hmm.
he wanted, in this one, in particular one, he wanted a new way to approach the issue of slavery and make it real to people today. And that's what it chronicles. It chronicles an alternate history in which the South won the Civil War and slavery is legal. And he said by using the documentary film, he thought that he reached a deeper truth. He talked about how a straightforward narrative leaves people an out, which is that they can just say, "Oh, it's just a story," but his fake documentary, didn't allow you to do that. You don't have a comfort zone. I mean, I guess I get what he's saying to a certain extent, but there have been plenty of movies that have cast a new light on slavery that weren't faux documentaries. It's an approach, but again, I feel like, and he would probably not say it, but I feel like it was just more of like a sensationalistic approach, like a kind of a shock, an awe factor to it. But like I said, once that wears off, it's
I could see that being the form where if that alternate reality where the Confederacy won and we're still living that life, which what would our day-to-day life look like? Well, then I guess the documentary form would make sense. Like we're gonna have newsreels, we're gonna have people on the street, as
right,
opposed to doing like Idiocracy, the Mike Judge, which is a narrative, but is also showing the alternate. Well, maybe that's becoming more true by the day. But like that just different kind of alternate form, I guess. You know what I mean? Like
right,
there's like some of those mockumentaries then become almost sketch like in just different segments of it's usually news broadcasts, talk shows, things like that. All these things
right,
that we associate with reality on TV that are obviously staged to some degree.
right. Well, to wrap up here, I'll list some of my favorites. And it would probably be a favorite of a lot of people. I would probably say, to me, the best example of a mockumentary and one that I would consider watching over again. I think I've only seen it once, maybe twice. Is This Is Spinal Tap by Rob Reiner? That's a very funny movie. In terms of the Christopher Guest canon, Waiting for Guffman is a very good one. I've seen all of Christopher Guest's movies. I would say Waiting for Guffman would probably be my favorite. Uh, Another one that we have not discussed, Tanner 88.
Oh yeah.
Is also one that you could check out. And Erik mentioned Popstar, and although it's not one of my favorites, we hadn't really talked about it. But it was cited under Mockumentaries, which is A Hard Day's Night, which is a documentary, following the Beatles, but they used a lot of fictional, scenes in what would depict a day in their life, and that's a quality film, but it is worth mentioning. We hadn't talked about that.
I guess in that respect too, just thinking now, the Scorsese one last year, Rolling Thunder, is that kind of the Bob Dylan one? Is that kind of a mockumentary? The
It kind of
real
makes
footage,
sense. It mixes, yeah.
repurposing it with real footage to kind of create some kind of faux narrative, I guess, if you want to say.
Right, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, documentaries are always evolving. People are always trying new things. I mean, but in that one, they did, I think they came right out at the beginning and told you what it was.
It got some people angry. Like I just remember the response was a little, and me not having any idea about the Rolling Thunder, that tour that they had. Like then when you had like some people come on who were obviously actors playing other people, like it kind of went over my head. So it wasn't until after I watched it and then read about it where I realized, oh, okay, this is like we talked about last week, the not having some context to what you're watching. Where I mean, look,
Right, and you know what? This is an example of you have the context, but I see. I didn't like that, and Martin Scorsese is one of my favorite filmmakers. I didn't understand the point of it, and I think that's what I said when I wrote about it on Letterboxd. Is I didn't understand. Like, okay, so you can do this. You can mix this footage and create sort of a fictional narrative with real people and events, but
yeah.
why
Yeah,
exactly?
that felt like a real inside joke that was only going to be humorous or ironic or sarcastic to a very limited audience, probably.
Right,
Like by the time Sharon Stone shows up and I'm seeing photos of her as a youth that are obviously doctored and whatever, I'm like,
right,
okay, this isn't for me. But
right. So that'll do it for this episode of Dailies to Downloads. Next episode, we will be discussing docudramas. Please join us. Give us a like, comment, whatever you feel like. Let us know what you think, and we will see you next week.